This is a homily for the first Sunday of Lent. The first reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 7 to 9, and chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. Last Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, marked the beginning of the liturgical season of Lent. The English word Lent comes from Old English Lenten, which literally means springtime. The root lenk refers to the lengthening of daylight as winter gives way to spring in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Western Church, the season was universally called Quadragesima, Latin for the 40th, referring to the 40-day period of preparation for Easter. This is the term found in early Latin liturgical books, councils, and writings of the Church Fathers. Because the English Church was thoroughly integrated into the Latin West, the formal liturgical term remained Quadragesima. However, as Christianity spread among the Anglo-Saxons, the people naturally referred to this period in their own everyday language. They used their vernacular word Lenten, meaning spring, the season of lengthening days. And from Lenten we get our English word Lent. Let's now take a quick look at the roadmap for our Lenten journey. On this first Sunday of Lent, we join Jesus in the desert. Matthew tells us that Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be put to the test by the devil. The 40 days of Lent recall the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert before beginning his public ministry. On the second Sunday of Lent, we ascend the mountain of the Transfiguration. Jesus leads Peter, James, and John up a high mountain, and there, in their presence, he was transfigured. On the third Sunday of Lent, we travel to a Samaritan town called Sychar, where Jesus, sitting beside a well, speaks with a Samaritan woman. On the fourth Sunday of Lent, we go to the pool of Siloam in Jerusalem. Jesus places a paste of soil and spittle on the eyes of a man born blind and sends him to wash in the pool. On the fifth Sunday of Lent, we journey with Jesus and the disciples to the village of Bethany, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. Together, these 5 Sundays trace a path of conversion, from the desert of testing to the mountain of glory, to the well of living water, to the opening of blind eyes, and finally to the tomb where life conquers death, preparing us to enter the mystery of Easter with renewed faith. On this first Sunday of Lent, we are invited to enter into 2 privileged biblical places, the garden and the desert. Both places test our fidelity to God. Firstly, the desert. Alessandro Pronzato's Meditations on the Sand gathers brief reflections from his time in the desert. And what did the desert teach him? Firstly, the desert is not a romantic backdrop, but a place that speaks the truth. There the usual supports fall away, and a person must face what lies within, fears, desires, and the parts of life that are easiest to avoid. Secondly, prayer becomes real in such a place because it brings these hidden things into the light. Thirdly, The Spirit works through this exposure not to unsettle us, but to set us free, loosening our grip on what is false, revealing what we cling to too tightly, and awakening a deeper longing for God that may feel like emptiness before it becomes grace. Fourthly, solitude may feel risky, yet it is often where God draws nearest. For Pronzato, the desert is not an escape from life, but a path into greater clarity, freedom, and communion with God. The 40 days Jesus spent in the desert deliberately echo the 40 years Israel spent in the wilderness after the Exodus. For both the Israelites and for Jesus, the desert is a place of testing. The Gospels of Matthew and Mark both make a striking claim about how Jesus enters the desert. Matthew tells us that Jesus was led by the Spirit. He uses the verb anago. But Mark puts it far more strongly. The Spirit drives him out into the wilderness. The verb Mark uses is ekbalo. It is a word that normally means to cast out, to force out, even to expel. It is the same verb Mark later uses for driving out demons. Mark wants us to feel the urgency, the Spirit thrusting Jesus into a place of testing. But Matthew wants us to see something different. He chooses a gentler verb, anago, which means he was led up, and he does this for a purpose. He portrays Jesus entering the desert in calm, deliberate obedience. He shows us a Lord who does not resist God's call, nor hesitate before hardship, but freely steps onto the path the Father has set for him. By softening Mark's forceful language, Matthew is not contradicting him. He is revealing another facet of the mystery. Jesus is not pushed into the wilderness against his will. He goes there willingly, with the same steadfast trust that once led Israel through the desert. Matthew's Gospel consistently presents Jesus as composed, sovereign, and guided rather than driven. And that is why this moment matters. The journey into the desert is not a detour, but a chosen path, embraced freely as the beginning of his mission for our salvation. Jesus is tested in the desert. The Greek verb that Matthew uses is peiradzo, which, depending on the context, can mean to test or to tempt. The distinction lies in the intention. A test can be given positively, to prove and strengthen a person, or negatively, as an enticement to fail, a temptation or seduction. Jesus is led into the desert under the Spirit's guidance, but he will be met there by the tempter. The desert has long served as a symbol of the encounter between the naked self and God. Barren, vast and unforgiving, it strips away distractions and leaves one alone with oneself. The desert journey becomes a metaphor for leaving everything behind and confronting the basic question, who am I? And what truly matters? In today's readings, we have testing in the garden and testing in the desert. Let's begin with testing in the garden. The man and the woman are told that they may eat the fruit of any tree in the garden, with one exception. They are not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now comes the temptation. The serpent is described as more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He says to the woman, "Did God really say you were not to eat from any of the trees in the garden?" Already the serpent is twisting God's word, turning a generous permission. You may freely eat of every tree in the garden with only one exception, into a harsh prohibition. You are not to eat from any of the trees. Temptation often begins not with an outright lie, but with a subtle distortion that makes God seem mean, restrictive, ungenerous. The woman replies, "We may eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it, nor touch it, under pain of death." The serpent beguilingly assures the woman, "No, you will not die. God knows, in fact, that the day you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, knowing good from evil." The woman saw that the tree was good to eat and pleasing to the eye, and that it was enticing for the wisdom that it could give. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. As a result, God banished the man and the woman from the garden. To make sure that they could never again enter the garden, God placed great winged creatures to guard the way to the tree of life. Paradise had been theirs. Now it is lost. They are now exiles. Was that simply because they ate a piece of fruit? Of course not. The fruit is the outward sign of an inward rebellion. Remember the tree from which the woman had taken the fruit. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So what does taking that fruit mean? Taking fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is equivalent to making a grab for moral autonomy. It's a way of saying, I am the sole arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. I'm not going to be told by anyone else, not even God. This is idolatry, for it is an attempt to take God's place. Only God can judge good and evil perfectly, seeing every heart and every consequence. When human beings seize that prerogative, they do not rise to divinity. They fall into a warped vision of themselves and the world. And what follows from this rebellion? Creation is subjected to decay, futility, sorrow, exile, and alienation. Humanity now lives under a curse. Accursed be the soil because of you. Painfully will you get your food from it as long as you live. It will yield you brambles and thistles as you eat the produce of the land. By the sweat of your face will you earn your food until you return to the ground as you were taken from it. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Those final words we heard last Wednesday as we were marked with ash. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The ashes are a symbolic reminder of our exile and our need for redemption. They are not theatre. They name the truth of our condition. We have lost the garden, and we cannot make our own way back. And why do we need to be redeemed? We need to be redeemed because today's gospel reminds us that we live in enemy-occupied territory. An evil power has made itself, for the present, the prince of this world. Bishop Robert Barron makes this observation. The scriptural authors understand sin not so much as a series of acts, but as a condition in which we are stuck, something akin to an addiction or a contagious disease. No amount of merely human effort could possibly solve the problem. Rather, some power has to come from outside of us in order to clean up the mess. Something awful has to be done on our behalf in order to offset the awfulness of sin. With this biblical realism in mind, we can begin to comprehend why the crucifixion of the Son of God was necessary. Jesus is to lead a new exodus, to rescue us from the power of the prince of this world. He steps into the desert as the new Adam and as the true Israel. Adam was tempted in a garden of abundance and fell. Jesus will be tempted in a wilderness of hunger and remain faithful. Israel was tested 40 years in the desert and often rebelled. Jesus will be tested 40 days and remain utterly obedient. So the prince of this world will attempt to sabotage this rescue mission before it even begins. He attempts to do this by leading God's anointed one down false paths, inviting him, as he once invited the woman in the garden, to distrust the Father, to grasp at power, to claim autonomy. Let's look closely at his strategy. When Matthew refers to the devil as perazon, he presents him as the one who tests. The term suggests deliberate probing. He places Jesus in situations that expose human vulnerability, offering possibilities that appear reasonable, but lead away from trust in God. The perazon is not simply an adversary. He is the examiner who presses with questions, alternatives, and opportunities that reveal whether a person will remain faithful or be drawn off course. The focus is on the pressure applied. By adding the second term, diabolos, Matthew sharpens the portrait. Derived from diabolo, to throw across, the word came to mean to misrepresent, to slander, or to accuse falsely. Here the emphasis falls not on testing, but on distortion. The diabolos is the one who twists meaning, casts doubt, introduces misleading interpretations, and disrupts clarity. He is the accuser who puts the worst construction on things and seeks to fracture understanding. Together, the two words give a composite picture. The perazon tests in order that the diabolos may distort. He pressures in order to mislead. He presents alternatives that seem plausible, but frames them in a way that obscures what is true. The perazon exposes the point of tension. The diabolos then exploits it by introducing confusion or misrepresentation. Matthew's language, therefore, indicates that the challenge Jesus faces in the wilderness is not merely the endurance of hardship, but the confrontation with an intelligence that examines, twists, and misleads. The adversary is both the perazon and the diabolos, the tester, and the falsifier, one who seeks to turn a moment of testing into a moment of distortion. So the devil attempts to lead God's anointed one down false paths. Let's now look at his strategy. First, Matthew sets the scene with stark simplicity. After 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, Jesus is exhausted and hungry. It is precisely at this point of physical weakness that the devil proposes his opening temptation. Tell these stones to become loaves of bread. On the surface, it sounds almost reasonable. Why shouldn't the Son of God relieve his hunger? But the force of the temptation lies elsewhere. It is a summons to define himself by his power. Show us what you can do. One of the most basic questions we can ask is, who am I? Many people answer that question in terms of what they do, their occupation or achievements. So the tempter says, in effect, become a wonder worker, give sight to the blind, make the lame walk, heal the deaf, cure some lepers, see what you can do with some loaves and fish. You'll dazzle the crowds. For Matthew's readers, the echoes of the Exodus story are unmistakable. In the wilderness, the people of Israel survived because God fed them with manna, the bread from heaven that sustained them for 40 years. The devil's insinuation is therefore sharp. If you are the one who leads a new Exodus, if you stand where Moses once stood, then prove it. Turn these stones into bread. Let your mission be grounded not in obedience to the Father, but in the pursuit of acclaim, efficiency, and visible results. This first temptation is not about hunger, but about identity. It presses Jesus to embrace a role shaped by public expectation rather than divine purpose, to found his ministry on spectacle rather than trust. Jesus refuses, and with that refusal sets the pattern for the whole scene. He will not be the Messiah on anyone's terms but God's. The devil then takes Jesus to Jerusalem and sets him on the parapet of the temple. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will give His angels orders about you, and they will carry you in their hands in case you trip on a stone. Imagine the reaction if Jesus were rescued in full view of the crowds. Immediate fame, instant credibility, a Messiah authenticated by spectacle. The temptation is not simply to survive the fall, it is to secure identity through public acclaim. If the first temptation whispers, "You are what you do," the second whispers, "You are what others say about you." It urges Jesus to let the crowd define him, to measure himself by admiration and applause. This touches something profoundly human. We all know the subtle pressure to perform, to be noticed, to live up to others' expectations. Bronnie Ware has an interesting occupation. She chooses to be a live-in companion to people who are dying. She's nurse, housemaid, confidant and friend. Her recent book is entitled The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Having accompanied many people who were dying, what has she learnt from them? When people look back over their lives, what are their chief regrets? What would they like to have done differently? According to Bronnie, of all the regrets and lessons shared with me as I sat beside their beds, the regret of not having lived a life true to themselves was the most common one of all. And so, regret number one is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. This insight goes straight to the heart of the second temptation. The devil invites Jesus to build his identity around public opinion, to let the crowd define him. But Jesus refuses. He will not allow his identity or mission to be shaped by external pressures, public approval, or the shifting voices of the crowd. He lives in obedience to the Father's voice, not the crowd's reaction. The devil then takes Jesus to a very high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendour, offering them in exchange for worship. This last temptation is the most shocking. At the threshold of Jesus' ministry, Matthew reveals something unsettling. The kingdoms of the world appear to be under the sway of the evil one, who speaks as though political power is his to distribute. Here the tempter appeals to a different hunger, the hunger for power. He is not asking Jesus to become a magician or a crowd pleaser, but a ruler. Use the power I can give you, he implies, to become the kind of Messiah your people long for. They want a strong leader, a Messiah who will expel the Romans, restore Israel's fortunes, defeat her enemies, and usher in peace and prosperity now in a visible and political form. You can give them the kingdom they dream of. You can make Israel master of its own destiny. This temptation strikes deep. It is the lure of using sacred authority for earthly dominance. It imagines the Messiah as a political liberator defined by conquest, influence, and control. It promises Jesus the power to impose good outcomes by force. It offers him a shortcut, the crown without the cross. Beneath this temptation lies the question of worship. In fact, all three temptations are about worship. Etymologically, the word means the act of acknowledging or declaring someone's worth. We could therefore say that worship means to ascribe worth. So where do I ascribe worth? What ultimately in life is most important to me? In biblical language, the essence of idolatry is placing anything other than God at the centre of ultimate concern. The evil one invites Jesus to bow, to acknowledge another absolute, another God around which his mission should revolve. But Jesus refuses. You must worship the Lord your God and serve him alone. What does today's gospel say to us? These ancient temptations expose the same seductions we face. My ultimate reality is what I do, my competence, productivity, achievements. My ultimate reality is what others think of me, my reputation, status, public image. My ultimate reality is what I have, the power I wield, the possessions I control, the influence I enjoy. Where I invest my time, talents, energy, money, imagination, enthusiasm, and emotion, that is, in reality, what I worship. Jesus meets each temptation with a steady, unwavering trust in his Father. We do not live on bread alone. We must not put the Lord our God to the test. We must worship the Lord our God. His loyalty remains undivided. His mission proceeds from the Father's will, not from human dreams of success or worldly authority. Matthew's Gospel does not end with the devil triumphant. The third temptation in today's Gospel seems to suggest that all the empires of the world are under the power of the devil. They are his to give to whomever he pleases. But Matthew's Gospel is about a great reversal, a regime change. Something decisive takes place between the mountain of temptation and a mountain in Galilee where the risen Lord commissions his disciples. He tells them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." The grip of the evil one has been broken. What was once claimed by the tempter as his domain has been reclaimed by the true King. We were indeed prisoners of war in enemy territory, but through the death and resurrection of Jesus, God has mounted a decisive invasion. The usurper has been dethroned, and Christ now reigns with an authority that does not dominate but frees. The kingdoms of this world are no longer dominated by the evil one, they are redeemed by Christ.